Welcome to the 2020 Page Education Foundation Elimination of Bias CLE. Thank you for being here, and thank you for support you've shown to the foundation over the years. I want to give a special thanks to the Minnesota Vikings, our presenting sponsor, United Health Group, our speaker sponsor, and Greenberg Traurig, our sustaining partner. They didn't flinch when the pandemic forced us to change the timing and ultimately the format of our program. While this is our first virtual CLE, our goals today are no different than they were in all of our previous programs. Beyond providing CLE elimination of bias credits, we hope that you will be moved to act. Talking about issues of race can be difficult, and it's never easy. Acting is even harder, but act we must, for it is through our actions that bias will be eliminated. Our second goal is to raise money for the Page Education Foundation. The foundation's mission is to encourage, motivate, and assist young men and women of color in the pursuit of post-secondary education. Over the years, we have provided more than $16 million in grants to almost 8,000 Page Scholars. This year, we have 567 Page Scholars, 31 of whom are pursuing careers in the law. All proceeds from today's program go to support the Foundation's mission. For me, my career in the law and the work that I've done with the Foundation is all about justice. The pandemic and the social unrest following George Floyd's killing have focused a harsh light on the need for educational justice. In reality, educational justice is linked inextricably to economic justice, to housing justice, to health justice, to social justice, and racial justice. And from the beginning, the Foundation has been animated by the need for justice. Acting together, we can bend the moral arc of history towards justice for all. Now, let me introduce our host for today, Anisha Murphy. Anisha is a former Page Scholar, a member of the Foundation's Advisory Board. She has a BA, a Master of Public Administration, and a JD from Hamline University. She's founded her own law firm, Just Law LLC, and she is an adjunct professor at Mitchell-Hamline Law School. Anisha?
Thank you, Justice Page, for the introduction, and welcome again to the first ever Justice Alan Page Elimination of Bias Virtual CLE Seminar. My name is Anisha Murphy, and I'll be your host for the remainder of the program. As Justice Page shared, our event is a learning opportunity as well as a fundraising effort to support the mission and work of the Page Education Foundation. The work of the Page Education Foundation is vital to eliminating bias as well as closing the racial achievement gap in our state. Since 1988, the Page Education Foundation has encouraged Minnesota students of color to pursue post-secondary education. They accomplished this by providing grants to post-secondary students who, in turn, volunteer as tutors and mentors in the community. From 2007 to 2015, I was one of those students. As a Page Scholar, the Page Education Foundation invested in me professionally and as a growing leader. When they found out I wanted to go to law school, they poured amounts of support and love into me. And today I am proud to say that I'm an attorney licensed in Minnesota. I am also one of the 24-member advisory board who volunteer our time to support the work of an organization that we believe in. Please join me and our event sponsors today in supporting the work of the Page Education Foundation by making a donation to help us reach our fundraising goals of $6,500. I will be introducing our speakers and moderators throughout the program. If you are experiencing any technical issues, please contact the Page Education Foundation at 612-332-0406. In addition, today's program has been approved for 2 elimination of bias credits. Our event code is 332548. After the program, you may download an attendance certification directly off of our event site from the main program tab. Our first presenter is Tracy Bransford. Tracy is an attorney and partner at Stinson LLP and serves as general counsel, entertainment, media, and sports attorney to her clients. She combines her deep understanding of clients' needs with a strong commitment to the tenets of diversity and inclusion and offers comprehensive solutions to key legal challenges that benefit the firm and its clients. Tracy is also the co-chair of the Entertainment and Media Law Subgroup. She is an active member of several charitable and professional organizations and is a sought-out speaker on entertainment law, sports law, celebrity, philanthropy, and diversity. Tracy is a mentor and co-chair of the Stinson Employee Resources Group for Attorneys of Color. Please join me in welcoming Tracy Bransford.
Good morning. Thank you, Anisha, for that beautiful and very gracious introduction. At this time, I would love to first thank the Page Education Foundation for your gracious invitation to me to speak at this wonderful CLE for the elimination of bias. And I thank, in particular, Justice Alan Page and his late wife, Diane Page, for all that they've done and continue to do. This morning's CLE will begin with a brief overview. The state of diversity today has many different tenets, but our focus this morning will be on women of color in law, and particularly the implicit racial bias in hiring and retention and in the practice of law. We'll be talking about current trends, key findings in the legal profession and in large law firms in particular. You will hear various anecdotes that reference push and pull factors, which we will reference more as why women leave the legal profession, particularly in large law firms, and why they stay. How you inherit a book of business upon a partner's retirement, and how and who gets informal and formal mentoring and sponsorship. For instance, push factors encourage people to leave their job. Think about that. Examples may include not seeing a path to partnership, not getting good assignments, constant criticism of work performances, especially around non-substantive items such as typos, not having mentorship or sponsorship. Pull factors, on the other hand, draw a person to a new opportunity like a magnet. Examples include going to a new employer that is more committed to diversity, or at least has more people of color so that you're not the lonely only. Going in-house because you don't want to deal with the challenges of fighting the origination credits or marketing demands. Going to a firm where you're more likely to make partner, or going to a place where people in leadership look like you. Black or African American representation among associates has finally surpassed the 2009 figures for the first time since the Great Recession. Yes, I said the Great Recession, and albeit just by 1/10 of a percentage point. However, the good news is that the percentage of associates that are Black or African American women remains on a slight uptick, although still below the 2009 figure. As of 2019, Black female partners represented 0.75%, Hispanic or Latinx female partners represented 0.8%, and Asian female partners represent 1.46% of all large law firm partners. And this is, again, based on the statistics from the National Association for Law Placement, also known as NALP. Now we're going to go to just a few data points for your reference. I will first pause so that you can review the slide. I would like to draw your attention to the fourth column, which is the percentage of women of color. You will note that women of color in the largest law firms, 701 lawyers and more, have the highest percentage of women of color at 4.06%. Our associate numbers are greater at 15.31%. And again, these are at the largest law firms. The numbers decrease significantly for smaller law firms. Now this slide is noteworthy because the numbers change when we add summer associates. Oftentimes, our recruitment efforts are fairly successful with regards to women of color. However, and you'll see in the future slides, at the time that we note the partner numbers, the percentages of women of color, again in the fourth category, are significantly lower. So what does this mean? On the associate level, in brief, women, people of color, and women of color all made steady gains in representation on the associate level. That's the good news. Some of the largest increases were realized for people of color, jumping about 1.2%. And that's from 2018 to 2019. Black or African American associates surpassed the 2009 level, again as referenced earlier, of 4.66% for the first time since the recession. And again, we're talking about the recession, rising to 4.76%. However, the share of Black or African American women, 2.8%, remains just below the 2009 figure of 2.93%. In 2019, just last year, women, people of color, and women of color all made small improvements in the representation at the partner level. Women experienced the biggest gains, increasing by approximately 0.8 percentage points from 2018 to 2019. Women of color continued to be the most dramatically underrepresented group at the partnership level. The percentage of partners that are women of color has nearly doubled since 2009. However, the numbers are simply growing from 1.88% in 2009 to 3.45% in 2019. Now let's talk about equity partners, those that, quote unquote, have a seat at the table. Equity partners in multi-tier law firms continue to be disproportionately white men. In 2019, just 1 in 5 equity partners were women at 20.3%, and only 7.6% were people of color. Almost 61% of male partners were equity partners as of February 2019, while somewhat less than half, not quite 47% of women partners and about 49% of partners of color were equity partners. Among non-equity partners, meaning income partners, almost 69% were men, just over 31% were women, and 10.7% were people of color. Now, of counsel, which is that intermediary spot between associate and partnership, the representation of women among counsel increased by 1.5 percentage points in 2019. Where you will find the largest number of attorneys of color is in the non-traditional track. Those are attorneys that are staff attorneys or find themselves working for the firm, but not necessarily having, again, a seat at the table. The percentage of people of color and women of color increased among non-traditional track and staff attorneys. Overall, women experienced a small decrease of approximately 0.2 percentage points in the representation among non-traditional track and staff attorneys. However, they still account for the majority of attorneys in large law firms at 57%. So what does this mean? The ABA Journal recently posted an article regarding our pipeline. In order for us to fully appreciate the numbers that we just saw and the data that was just presented, it's important to look at those that are coming out of our law schools and where they're landing in the legal community. A recent article from just October of this year referenced that Black law grads trail in employment overall and in bar passage required jobs. And again, this is a statistic from the National Association of Law Placement. Black law graduates in the class of 2019 had the lowest overall employment rates among all racial and ethnic groups, and lower employment in bar passage required jobs than white graduates. Now, we do have some good news. There are at least some of our attorneys of color that are coming out of law school that are doing quite well. NELP found that Asian and Pacific Islander and white graduates had the highest employment rates. But when we look at the starting salaries for employed graduates, there was still a lower starting salary for our Native American, Native Hawaiian, and other Pacific Islander graduates. This article does go on to at least talk about the good news for women. By gender, women had the highest employment rate at 90.6%, but men had a higher median salary, and that's the bad news. So as we continue to look at our pipeline into the legal profession, it's very important that we look at how our Black law school graduates enter the legal community and how we can support those efforts. In that same vein, we'll now turn to the professionals that have done the work. There are 2 American Bar Association reports that speak specifically to women in the legal profession and women of color in particular. The first of the reports is entitled Visible Invisibility. That was a 2006 report, and it was followed most recently by Left Out and Left Behind. Both initiatives were sparked by the American Bar Association Commission on Women in the Profession. I had the honor to speak with past American Bar Association and past National Bar Association President Paulette Brown in preparation for my remarks today. And Paulette reflected some very interesting thoughts and observations for me to share with you. She said, "Tracy, there is one statistic that has not changed over the course of the past 20 years. Women of color represent approximately 2% of all equity partners at large law firms. That 2020 statistic, combined with anecdotal information collected in the study or studies, is cause for sufficient alarm. There's the mere fact that women of color were not even present and there were not enough numbers to conduct a fulsome analysis was another concern of hers. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. In looking at the data, which we will look at, and some of the anecdotal quotes from those studied, it was found that while there were few women of color in the ranks of equity partner, those who stayed, meaning the pull factors, are not necessarily staying because of job fulfillment. Many stay for reasons that relate to their culture or financial obligations. The study results are also disturbing because many women of color want to leave the profession because they see the disparity between themselves and their white counterparts, but do not see a viable alternative to their current situation. Those who do enjoy the work in their current environment and in being a lawyer nevertheless view the playing field as not equal. Women of color experience a double whammy of gender and race, that intersectionality, unlike white women or even men of color who share at least one of these characteristics, gender or race, with those in the upper strata of management. Women of color may face exclusion from informal networks, inadequate institutional support, and challenges to their authority and credibility. Let's talk about the focus groups for visible and visibility, which was our earlier study. There were 5 focus groups comprising women of color that were convened in March and April of 2005. Now you might ask, why are we talking about 2005? Sadly, it's because the numbers have not changed greatly, and because the 2 studies that we'll discuss are the 2 and only seminal studies on women of color in the legal profession. Now, just to give you a bit of a backdrop as to who was a part of the focus group or the survey, there were 5 cities that the women lived in: Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., Chicago, New York, and Atlanta. There were 48 women of color. The numbers were modest. By 2005, 81% of minority female associates had left their law firms within 5 years of being hired. Among attorneys of color, 29% of women of color and 25% of men of color. And again, this study also noted men of color and their statistics. They reported missing out on desirable assignments because of race. Again, a push factor. 49% of women of color and 31% of men of color reported that they were denied informal or formal networking opportunities because of race. Again, a push factor. 35% of women of color and 24% of men of color reported having missed client development and client relationship opportunities because of race. Again, a push factor. When asked whether career-damaging events could be attributed to gender, less than 3% of white men or men of color attributed such experiences to gender. With that same study, women attorneys in the survey had a much different story. 32% of women of color and 39% of white women reported missing out on desirable assignments because of gender. And then the same factors for networking opportunities and client relationships and promotion opportunities, women of color and white women reported missed opportunities. Again, push factors. So what does this mean? I talked to Paulette, and I was honored to have a time to discuss this with her. And she said, Tracy, most women of color in the survey found it stressful to negotiate their gender and racial identities in a predominantly white male environment. Bottom line, nearly half, 49%, reported having been subject to demeaning comments or other types of harassment while working at a private law firm, as did 47% of white women, 34% of men of color, and only 2% of white men. Some of the comments that you will hear are direct quotes from the studies that I referenced. I have not abbreviated them, and some of the language may be offensive to those, but it's stated in context and without interruption for purposes of impact. An Asian attorney recalled, I had a managing partner call me into his office when I was a 4th-year associate. He introduced me to the client, who was Korean, and he tells him that I'm Korean too. He says, She eats kimchi just like you, he said to me. Talk to him. I looked at the client and said, it is a pleasure to meet you. I'm sure you speak English better than I speak Korean. The client's face was so red. Then the partner left a message on my internal message system, and he was speaking gibberish, trying to sound like an Asian speaker. I called every partner on my floor and said, you need to come and listen to this. I played that message 10 times. 10 times. A Native American woman said, you have to have an incredibly tough skin. I had people make comments like, oh, you're Indian? Where's your tomahawk? Are you going to scalp me? Or, can I call you Pocahontas? When I was called chief and brought it to people's attention, I was told, oh, you're spoiling our work environment here. So I had to leave. Some of the barriers you can't do anything about, like the misperceptions people have in their own minds about your race or your sex or your background. So you start by having to overcome those negative assumptions, stereotypes, and presumptions. And then there's the, quote, black tax of having to demonstrate outsized achievements just to get the same opportunities as everyone else. It's not by accident that at the firms at which I worked, every single Black associate had at least 2 Ivy League degrees. Majority associates, not so much. The bias that I face as a woman of color has become the elephant in the room. It means that I have to keep proving myself to clients, peers, superiors, subordinates, even after each success. Sometimes others assume that I am not a threat because they don't see me as a real contender for business or leadership roles. I am not seen as a viable team member until I prove that I am. Then, even once I get buy-in from the others, there are those who doubt my abilities or wait for me to fail. I feel like I have to try harder than white men. I feel like people don't give me the same tools to succeed or excel. I have to make my own way without these tools for success. I face adversity even when I try to be normal. Being content is not an option for me. I think judges expected me to be dumb or unprepared. They compliment me as if I am an exception. I have judges trying to correct my English skills. I had a prosecutor infer I was illegal. I saw this happen to other women of color. One of the smartest women I know stopped practicing in immigration court because of the way she was undermined. The judges would only talk about her hairstyle and not about the quality of her argument. I have heard judges complain about women being bitchy. A judge in our jurisdiction denied a continuance for a woman who had just had a baby, and when she appeared with the baby in tow, he held her in contempt. On numerous occasions, male colleagues have resubmitted something that I prepared in a case and were granted while I was denied the exact same submission. Asian women are seen as quiet, docile, amiable, and conflict averse. The opposing lawyer trying to get his way is all the more outraged to find that I do not conform to his preconceived and wrong beliefs. So what did that mean for you? Did any of you all see yourselves, whether it be a white male partner, whether it be a young Asian associate, whether it be an African American woman partner ascending to associate status, whether it be a Latinx woman seeking partnership respect, or anyone in between. If you can see yourself in any of those scenarios, and they were all factual scenarios as stated by women in both the surveys referenced earlier, then we're in the right place for the CLE to eliminate bias. Through all of the studies that are referenced today, through the conversations that I had with our Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at Stinson, whether it was through my conversation with past president of the American Bar Association and National Bar Association, Paulette Brown, or others, we are all trying to put forth recommendations because there is good news. We hope that we all can integrate women of color into existing diversity and professional development efforts. Well, what does that mean? Integrate, that's the key word there. Not an afterthought, not to fill a table for purposes of showing that there's diversity, but to integrate women of color into the existing professional development efforts. It makes good business sense, and it makes a better workplace. Address the success of women of color as a firm issue. Because the numbers are so small, it's important to be celebrated, not simply tolerated. And the successes of women, particularly given the modest numbers in large law firms, should be noted and celebrated. Integrate women of color into measurement efforts. So, as we try to increase the numbers, maybe it's a positive for some of the lawyers that help get those numbers increased. So as we look at the end of the year metrics for some of our large law firms, perhaps we might think of those that have been integral in attempting to integrate women of color into the fabric of the law firm. Stay compliant with anti-discrimination and anti-harassment policies, and hold people accountable for non-compliance. In the earlier slides, we referenced that a large majority of women of color and women stated that they had been harassed and were the subject of discrimination. If everyone is not held accountable, that behavior will continue to exist. Integrate women of color into the firm's social and professional fabric. In the earlier slides, we discussed that many women and women of color and some men of color felt that they were left out of the social and professional fabric, not asked to the party, not even asked to dance. Encourage women of color to associate with affinity bar associations for business development. Now, this recommendation, it also goes to the bottom line of marketing and where the spend at a given law firm or corporation comes into play. We've noted those small numbers of women of color at large law firms. In order for them to develop business, in order for us to develop business, we have to be amongst those that would want to give us business. Therefore, affinity bar associations, the fact that I could pick up the phone and call Paulette Brown, who I know from the National Bar Association and from her participation here locally with the Minnesota Women Lawyers, as she's presented on more than one occasion, is based on the support that I receive from my law firm to attend affinity bar associations for business development. So whether it's on the local level, the Minnesota Association of Black Lawyers, Minnesota Women Lawyers, or on the national level, the National Bar Association, Minnepaha locally, NAPABA nationally, the Hispanic Bar Association, the National Hispanic Bar Association, BESLA, Black Entertainment and Sports Lawyers Associations. These are just some of the many, and the Minority Corporate Counsel Association. These are just some of the many affiliate bar associations that I have had the pleasure of affiliating with and that have been very integral in my business development. And I've heard that is true for other colleagues of mine. And last, continue the education process of both in-house and outside counsel, both, to hold each other accountable for women of color having a seat at the table before the meal is served. And that anecdote came from Paulette Brown and follows one that was told to me many years ago. In closing, in 1985, when I was a senior at Spelman College, I had the distinct honor of being taught by former Congresswoman and the first Black woman to run for President of the United States, Shirley Chisholm. And as she taught me in a class about Black women in politics, she told us all, if you're not given a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. And I leave you with that because we all deserve a seat at the table. And I thank the wonderful organization that has brought me here today, the Page Education Foundation, because you are ensuring that we all will have seats at the table and ensure a better future for our generations to come.
Thank you so much, Tracy. At this time, I would also like to thank all of those who have made a donation during our program. As stated earlier, all proceeds from this event benefits the mission and work of the Page Education Foundation. And at this time, I would like to introduce our second speaker, Kevin Warren. Kevin serves as the 6th commissioner of the Big Ten Conference and the first African American commissioner to lead an Autonomy 5 conference. Kevin's most recently served as the Chief Operating Officer for the Minnesota Vikings and the National Football League, where he worked since 2005. In his tenure, Kevin was the highest-ranking African American executive working on the business side for the team in the NFL, and was the first African American COO in the NFL's history. Under Kevin's visionary leadership, the Vikings the organization, with an emphasis on broadening the executive team and promoting women to key executive positions. In 2013, Kevin was named a member of the NFL's Committee on Workplace Diversity, which is committed to enhancing and promoting diversity at every level of the NFL. Prior to joining the Vikings, Kevin worked for the international law firm of Greenberg Traurig. Please join me in welcoming Kevin Warren to the stage.
Thank you, Nisha, for the introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here today. It truly is always an honor to do anything that I could do for Judge Page and Diane Page. They've been so instrumental in my life. They've been so instrumental in the life of so many people in the Twin Cities, and I will forever be grateful for Judge Alan Page, Diane Page, the entire Page family, and the Page Foundation. So thank you for taking the time to join us today. And what I want to do, and I've been told, is that we can have a family conversation during this CLE seminar, and it was great to hear Tracy and all the information that she was able to share this morning. So Tracy, thank you for that. First thing I wanted to do was to really talk about, one, the Big Ten Conference, while we're here today, the situation analysis, challenges and diversity inflation, the benefits of cultural diversity in the workplace, and then also a commitment to transformation. As it was said during the introduction, on January 2nd of earlier this year, I was able to start as the 6th commissioner of the Big Ten Conference. One of the unique things about the Big Ten Conference is over 125 years old. And so I'm humbled and honored every single day that I go in the office, or every single day that I wake up, to think about since 1895. There's only been 5 individuals before me who have led the Big Ten Conference. And so it's something I take very seriously, something I'm honored to be able to serve in this capacity. And one of the first things that I did is that I found portraits of all the 5 men who had come before me, and they're on my wall every morning when I walk into the office at the Big Ten Conference. It's a reminder of the history of the Big Ten Conference. As you can see on the screen, we have 14 institutions that span from Nebraska all the way to New Jersey, over 11 contiguous states. Some of the greatest brands in all of college athletics. And who are we? We have 3 offices. Our headquarters is in Rosemont, Illinois. We have an office in New York City and in Washington, D.C. We have about 50 employees with revenues exceeding $750 million. About 11 people in a normal year will attend our sporting events. And we do own a network, Big Ten Network, and we have over 60 million homes who are members of the Big Ten Network. As I had mentioned, we have 14 schools. We do have some affiliate members, Notre Dame in hockey, Johns Hopkins University in lacrosse. We have almost 10,000 student athletes, 28 conference sports that we sponsor, over 6.2 million living alumni, 580,000 students on our campuses, $10 billion in funded research, 350 teams, 42 total sponsor sports, 1,846 academic All-Americans, and we also deal with $200 million in direct financial support to our nearly 10,000 student athletes. Our revenues have grown exponentially, as you can see, over the last 35 years. But over the last 15 years, our distributions have grown 485%. We were at about $117 million in fiscal year 2005 and 2006. And during fiscal year of 1920, will be about $688 million. And over the last 10 years, we have really seen exponential growth. But one of the areas that we have an opportunity, and I don't ever say a problem, but an opportunity is my preferred word, is in the area of diversity, inclusion, and the elimination of bias. So why are we here today? Studies have shown that companies, conferences, businesses, law firms, and institutions that have a diverse leadership do better. It not only makes sense, C-E-N-T-S, but it makes sense, S-E-N-S-E. They have better revenues, they foster a more innovative, productive, inclusive work environment, they're more nimble, they make better decisions. And if you're listening today and watching today, I would challenge you in your organization to take a look around, to ask yourself, are you a diverse workplace? Not in words, but in actions. And one of the things that I would always do pre-COVID is to go visit businesses when we would have meetings. And I would love to be able to walk the hallways, to see the faces, see the people of who are really working at our various businesses. But I would challenge all of you, the companies you invest in. Your own business. Look at your website. Look at the pictures on the website. Are you diverse? Not only in color and sexual orientation and gender, are you a diverse organization? One of the things that I'm most proud of is the 15 years that I spent at the Minnesota Vikings. I was adamant about empowering not only people of color, but also women. And they had a recent round of promotions, and many of the women who I had a chance to bring into the organization, to provide them with an opportunity, just received recent promotions, one of which I believe is watching today, Karen Nelson, who was a lawyer at Cargill for many years, but who's been a sports fan, who's a phenomenal legal and brilliant mind, who wanted an opportunity, who probably never would have had an opportunity. But I am blessed and honored to have given her an opportunity, and now she has taken it forward and has just recently been named the Chief Legal Officer of the Minnesota Vikings. So I would challenge all of us in all of our organizations to look around, whether it's at the internship level, whether it's at the senior level. It is never too late to make a difference, to create a diverse workforce, to create an environment that does not accept or even encourage bias to occur, whether it's from training, but really, again, look at your organization and ask yourself, would you pass the smell test when it comes to elimination of bias and when it comes to diversity and inclusion? So one of the things that I knew that I would focus on when I took the job at the Big Ten is the fact that we need to create an environment that embraces diversity, embraces differences, embraces positivity. Because one of the things that I think we all matter, regardless of what our background is, of what we look like. And I'm so conscious that words matter. I grew up in a home of educators. My father was a teacher. He eventually became a professor. My mother was a librarian, an absolutely brilliant, intellectually gifted woman, but she loved to read and she loved kids. So she chose the journey of being a librarian. And one of the things that my late great mother taught me is that words matter. And if you think about many of the words in the English language that we use that have connotations about color, blacklisted, a black cat. If a black cat runs in front of your car, what do people tell you to do? Don't pass that way, turn around. A blackout. If you're playing billiards and you hit the black ball, what happens? You lose. All of those different things, words matter. And so even in our businesses, even in our law firms, we have to be cognizant of the fact that words matter. Things we say, things we do really do matter. So one of the things that I wanted to share with you today is here are our athletic directors in the Big Ten Conference. One of the things that I'm most proud of also at the Big Ten Conference is that our last three hires are Christina Johnson, the new president at The Ohio State University. And our most recent two presidents are Dr. Darrell Pines at the University of Maryland and Jonathan Holloway at Rutgers University, both two black men. So I'm proud that we're making progress in the Big Ten. You look at our director of athletics. You know, we're fortunate to have a talented group of men of color, of women. And if you look at other conferences, the ACC, but I always want to focus on us in the Big Ten. We have one woman in Sandy Barber who leads the athletic department at Penn State University. We have three black men in Damon Evans at Maryland, Ward Manuel at the University of Michigan, and Gene Smith at The Ohio State University. And we have one Hispanic leader in Barry Alvarez at the University of Wisconsin. If you look at the Autonomy 5 conferences, the Power 5 conferences, the ACC, the Big 10, the Big 12, the Pac-12, and the SEC, there are only 9 black athletic directors. So we have 33% of the 9 black athletic directors in the Big 10. In these Autonomy 5 conferences, we only have 5 female athletic directors. We have 2 Hispanic, Latino athletic directors in the Autonomy 5 conferences. Here are my peers: Bob Bosley at the Big 12, Greg Sankey at the SEC, Larry Scott at the Pac-12, and John Swafford at the ACC. We have a lot of opportunities that will come up for women, for people of color, which is why I have those pictures hanging on my wall as a reminder that in all of these conferences, that we have a great opportunity to get better and to grow our base. As was said, I'm very cognizant of being the first black commissioner of a Power 5 conference. I understand what that means. It's not a normal job. Someone asked me just this week, am I having fun? And I told them, is that when you're in a process of trying to make history and to leave a legacy, this is not a job to me. This is a movement. The word fun is not in my vocabulary. I'm trying to open doors, windows, for people of color, for women, for people who've been in marginalized communities. And I will continue to do that every single day. So what we did here from a situational analysis standpoint is we started to unpack some of these issues. Is that 68 Division I programs have hired a black coach since 1979. 4 black head coaches have been rehired as non-interim head coaches in an A5 conference after getting fired from a previous head coaching position. Only 2 programs at the A5 level have hired another black coach after the firing of a previous black head coach. That's Colorado and Stanford. Only 13.8% black head coaches in the A5 between 2008 and 2018. They're 21 out of 52. What's interesting is that among all of the 130 FBS programs, including the 65 schools in the A5 conferences, there's only been 6 black men who have been hired after being fired as head coaches. Only 6 men: Carl Durrell, Mike Loxley, Kevin Sumlin, and then others like Willie Taggart and Charlie Strong. Only a handful. But what's interesting, 19 white men this year alone were hired who were previously fired as coaches or resigned under pressure. So we have great opportunities here. Stats have shown that white coaches in college football get longer tenures than coaches of color. 6.8 years for the average white coach, 3.4 years for the average black coach. So one of the things I would challenge all of you all to do as we start looking at statistics in your business, in your law firms, in your corporations, on your boards, is to start to unpack the data. So here's some data that's in your materials, and you can spend time, with it. We put in some tables in there to show you the number of student athletes. And clearly, as we've talked about today, and as you already know, that the diversity in our coaching ranks and our athletic director ranks and our commissioner ranks do not mirror the diversity on the playing field, as you can see from the various charts here. So one of the things we need to start looking at is starting to look at the head coaching staffs. I've always been one of those people to study the trajectory of what it happens to become head coaches, whether it's in basketball, any sport, or football. What positions do they come from? To ask ourselves, are we giving people of color the opportunity to really be on a path to be a head coach in our sports? So when I talked about unpacking the statistics in your various industries, here's an example. We're fortunate Donald Anthony Jr., an incredible man, is the fencing coach. But he's also the fencing coach for men and for women. So as you start looking at some of the items that Tracy talked about in law firms with associates and partners, some of the items in sports, some of the items in Wall Street, some of the items in Silicon Valley, some of the items in numbers on board seats, even unpack that data, because what you'll find is many times, even though those numbers are even low on its face, they're even lower than they seem because the way the structure of the numbers are. But I'm proud in the Big Ten that we do have 27 black head coaches across various sports. As you can see, we have them in track and field and cross country and fencing and football and basketball and volleyball. So I'm really proud what we've accomplished in the Big Ten, but we also do have a great opportunity to grow it even further, which we will do. Here's a list of our coaches in the Big Ten. As you can see, from gymnastics to basketball to football to track and field to baseball to volleyball to softball to diving. But these are the stories that we need to start talking about, talking to our young people. That you can go to college and have a goal of being a student athlete and even have a goal of maybe being a professional athlete. But you also can have a goal of being a leader of men and women, from a coach, from an athletic director, from a commissioner standpoint, because once people have an opportunity to see things, they can become it a little bit easier. So it's interesting as we start looking at the assistant coach numbers. We have 198 black assistant coaches in the Big Ten, and 100 are really within 3 sports: football and men's and women's basketball. So those are areas that we have a great opportunity to grow. All of this information is in your slide deck to really spend some time on looking at the different numbers across sports. Some of the unique items in sports is the racial and gender report card by Tides, is that there's 48.5% of our football players in FBS were black in 2019. Only 10.8% were head coaches, made up of black men. And I even unpack that further. Not only the total number of people, of players, is what percent are starters. So we have a great opportunity to continually get better in this area. In football, the same thing holds true in basketball. 53.2% of our men's basketball student athletes are black young men, where 23.6% are black coaches. But again, you can unpack the situation from a starter standpoint. In women's basketball, 41.9% are black young women, and 14% of the head coaches in women's basketball are black. So where are we, and what are the benefits of cultural diversity? Some of these I've talked about it. It makes us stronger together. It's something that we're focused on in the Big Ten Conference, not only at our individual institutions, but at our conference office. And we're starting to talk about these issues, to unpack opportunities. Why? Because it improves culture insights, wider range of skills, improves your company reputation, reduces employee turnover, improve employee engagement, increase productivity, creates a more creative environment, and even increase profits. The studies have shown, as we've talked about at the top of this presentation, is that ethnically diverse companies, 35% of the time, do better financially than non-ethnically diverse companies. And companies with diverse management teams, 19% of the time have higher revenues and financial productivity. And when you have a diverse group, 87% of the time you make better decisions. When you have a diverse group, you make decisions 2 times faster, which again leads to better productivity and better profit margin. And diverse teams, 60% of the times deliver better results. So again, look around your board tables, but now that we're not sitting around the table physically, but we are on our computer devices, the next call that you're on within your organization, put up the screen that allows you to look at all the pictures and ask yourself, are you working for, are you leading, are you working within a diverse and inclusive organization? So at the Big Ten Conference, we've made a commitment to transformation. We've started the Equality Coalition. We had voter registration initiatives. We've created a platform that deals with mental health and wellness of our student athletes, our coaches, of everyone. But here are the many words of people in our Equality Coalition that put forward on this word cloud. As you can see, the larger ones: equality and compassion, action, love, learn, opportunity, power, change, empower, unity. Because we want to be united as one in the Big Ten. I said this, and it seems like 10 years ago, but this was during our women's basketball tournament. And I was very clear that leaders need to demonstrate with both their words and their actions that diversity matters and will make an organization better. And then a truly and inclusive and productive culture must be developed, reinforced, and maintained. And those are 3 words, as I come to the end of my presentation, that I would challenge you to write down today. Developed, reinforced, and maintained. It's one thing to develop a diverse and inclusive program, but then after you develop the program, you need to reinforce it. But then, most of all, you need to maintain it. So one of the things that we've presented here today and that we're working on internally before we formally roll it out, and this is just an example, nothing formalized, but how can we grow the number of coaches, not only in people of color, but in women in the Big Ten? How can we grow the number of athletic directors? How can we help be a leader in growing the number of commissioners? We can create rotational programs to put assistant coaches with other institutions, athletic directors and head coaches, and host a conference. We can do the same thing for coaches. We can do the same thing for athletic directors. We can do the same thing for people who want to be conference commissioners. But we need to help develop and give people the skills. It's one thing to say, yeah, we have a diverse environment, but what are you doing to one day to create an environment where a lot of the young people in your organization are learning and growing and staying and not leaving? What are you doing from a professional development standpoint, an interview preparation standpoint, leadership training, media press conferences, public speaking workshops, introducing them to search firms, just developing relationships so that when they do get the opportunity to have an opportunity, that they are prepared. So your voice does matter. Something about this seminar today that Tracy started off, that Judge Alan Page and Diane Page created, the legacy of the Page Educational Foundation. Something piqued your interest to be here today. This is not about just getting CLE credit. This is about looking inside of your organization and asking yourself, if you had to give yourself a racial, bias, diversity, inclusion report card, what would it be? Are you headed in the right direction? Have you made progress? Have you regressed? And what can you do to get better? And I'll close with this, and it really, as they say, a picture says 1,000 words. After the murder of George Floyd, our head of officials, Bill Carolla, and I talked, and we wanted to do something special. So originally, before we postponed the season, is that we had planned to do this at the University of Minnesota, their first home game. It still would have been powerful. But when we came back to play football, all of a sudden that first home game was a nationally televised game against the University of Michigan on ABC. But Bill Carolla, of the many things that I respect about him, one of the things I respect about him most is that he stood firm. And we made the determination that we wanted to have an all-black officiating crew made up of men, made up of a woman, and not only officiating, but in the replay booth, everywhere involved in that game. And we accomplished it. And this picture is on my desk at the Big Ten. I sent a note and a copy of this picture to every one of those individuals to tell them thank you for being a soldier. Thank you for making history. And I also sent a note to Bill Carolla thanking him. He could have very easily said, well, Kevin, I really can't get the people. I don't know if we could pull it off. But when I walked out on that field, just a few miles where George Floyd was murdered, and I looked around to see these individuals, I was so proud to have a little piece to do of making it sure that we could tell the world that it's one thing to say that you believe in diversity. It's another thing to say you believe in inclusion. And it's another thing to say you're against bias, but it's another thing to do it. And so as the commissioner of the Big Ten Conference, I'm proud that we're not where we want to be from a diverse standpoint, but we're moving in the right direction. And I would challenge you to do the same things. And I'll close with this. As I've said to Judge Page on many times, I challenge everyone that when you get to the top of the building, always remember to don't not only just walk off the elevator, but to send the elevator back down, to bring as many people with you as you possibly can. So many companies now, so many people now, not only do they get off the elevator, but they actually push the stop button so it can't move. But what has made the legacy of Judge Alan Page and Diane Page and the Page Education Foundation is that they have been leaders in the space of making sure that they send the elevator back down to bring as many people, regardless of their background, to the top. And with that, I'll close and to tell you it's been a pleasure to spend time with you today and to tell you how honored I am anytime I get an opportunity to represent the Page Education Foundation. Enjoy your day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kevin. I am a testament of Justice Alan Page and Diane Page sending the elevator down and back up to my success. So thank you so much for those awesome words. We will now be moving into the second part of our program, moderator-led panel discussion. We encourage those of you watching today to participate in our panel discussion by submitting your questions in the chat section of the live feed. Our discussion today will be moderated by Lola Veliquez Agaloo. Lola is a litigation and investigations counsel at Medtronic. She also serves as a member of the legal department's Diversity and Inclusion Council. In 2019, Governor Tim Walz appointed Lola to serve as the chair of the Commission on Judicial Selection. Prior to joining Medtronic, Lola served as an assistant U.S. attorney in the District of Minnesota, and before that was a litigation associate at Dorsey and Whitney. She also clerked for retired Minnesota Supreme Court Justice Alan C. Page and the U.S. District Court Judge Ann D. Montgomery. Lola has been recognized 2 times as an Attorney of the Year by Minnesota Lawyer, and in 2019, Lola received the Minnesota Lawyer Diversity and Inclusion Award for her work in helping to diversify the judiciary in Minnesota.
Well, wonderful. Thanks to both of you for those presentations. That was fantastic. And I'm really excited for our conversation today. We've already been getting a lot of questions. The first question I want to ask, Tracy, actually it's a statistic that I've been thinking about a lot and you mentioned today. The fact that in 20 years, we really haven't made progress with respect to the number of women of color who are equity partners in large law firms. That 2% number has been stagnant. And listening to you, I can't help but feel stuck, like we have been running in place. And we know that those last 20 years have seen a lot of diversity and inclusion initiatives. Why do you think progress has been so hard to achieve? And Kevin, same for you. In your field, there have been so many efforts. Why is progress so hard to reach?
Well, Lola, I'll start. And first, I wanted to thank you, Kevin, for your remarks. They were wonderful. And I want to also take personal privilege in thanking you for walking the walk with me as I first came to Minnesota. And you've been a leader and a mentor and a friend. And so I thank you for doing what you say you do. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. Feelings are mutual.
Thank you. Lola, I don't know why the numbers are stagnant, but they are. What I do want to mention is that it's very difficult in large law firms for our mid-level associates to make it to partnership. And I say that because somewhere along the way, the blueprint that is needed to get there is not conveyed and or not received. You know, we try, and there's many wonderful and diligent efforts on behalf of large law firms. So this is not in any way disparaging, but I see associates preparing to leave. One reason I believe, and I've been told, and that's not necessarily at my firm, but at many firms, is that they don't see other women of color in the partnership ranks. So they don't believe that they can get there. And I understand that that may be a concern. So if you've got the numbers that are so small, and you see those small numbers and no one feels they can get there, it's a perpetual problem. I myself was the first Black woman attorney at Stinson, partner. We now have, in our Minneapolis office rather, we now have two Black women partners in our Minneapolis office. And so, and it's not based on any efforts that we are not putting forth, but the ascension to partnership, there's not enough in the pipeline that stay and want to stick it out to get there, and other opportunities present themselves. And I don't know how to change that reality, but that's the reality, because in fact, in many firms, and I talk with many colleagues, I don't see them getting their coffers of Black female partners full, or women of color.
I feel along the lines, again, what Tracy just said. People need to see people in positions, and they need to see people in those positions to do well. And I think it's incumbent upon people like myself and Tracy that we have to endure. That's why I said what I said about fun. This is not about fun. You know, my fun ended the day that literally I accepted this opportunity, and I knew that, you know, was the fact that this was about a platform, it's about a legacy, this was about giving young people a chance to see that they can do it. The other thing, to be just very blunt and transparent about it, is that when people of color get in positions of authority where they can't hire people, then we got to stop being shy about it. And so many times I've had conversations with people in law firms, on Wall Street, in corporate America, in sports, and all of a sudden when they have an opportunity to hire someone, they've said to me that, you know, I don't know if I could hire another Black person at a senior level position. And that's something that, you know, whether that has been told or, you know, certain people want to, you know, believe, we have to get to the point to feel comfortable to hire the best person. And if it happens to be a woman, hire the woman. If it happens to be a white male, hire them. If it happens to be a Black male, hire him. Go for the best person, but to give people an opportunity, that's one of the things that I would challenge all of us, you know, whoever we are, is that we need to feel comfortable, that we are comfortable in hiring people who deserve an opportunity, who may not be part of the traditional hierarchy, and then not only hire them, because it's one thing to hire someone, but it's another thing to provide them with the resources to succeed. And one of the things I've challenged all the people at the Big Ten is to ask ourselves, when we hire someone and bring them in here, what would we do if our son or daughter or sister or brother came to that position? You know, you wouldn't do the work for them, but you would provide them with a roadmap, because so many times in sports, in business, in law firms, in corporate America, it's not about the written rules, it's about the unwritten rules. Mm-hmm. and whether that's dress, whether that's decorum, whether that's going to a restaurant, whether how to properly valet park, how much do you tip, all those different subtleties and nuances that we as leaders need to make sure that we're imparting that to all of our young people, regardless of their color, but to help them, to give them the best chance to succeed and expose them to certain things in life.
So there's a really, I think, interesting statistic that shows that when people of color in-house hire diverse outside counsel or advocate for the hiring of a diverse lawyer, that that we take a credibility hit.
Oh, yeah.
So what advice do you have for folks so that they can lean in and make the hiring decision that's so important and get ahead of that credibility hit or get ahead of that issue, overcome it, even if it's just in their own minds?
I know from my standpoint is you know, you're going to take hits. You get to certain positions. You know, it's never, even on a windy day, if you're standing on the ground, it's not too windy. But if you go on top of the house, it's a little bit windier. You go on top of a building, it's more windier. So you're going to get hits no matter what. That's just the nature of the jobs that we have. And so if you're going to take hits, you might as well take hits with giving people opportunities. But those are those subtleties and nuances, as I've talked about, you know, the black cat and blacklisted, that some of this is in our mind that we think we take a credibility hit, so we shy away from it. But we together, regardless of our color, need to start to feeling empowered. But I've heard that same thing, and I've had friends who have been in companies, and they're very suspect of hiring people of color if they're an in-house general counsel of color, because they don't want to, because if something goes wrong, well, you know, it can go wrong with anyone.
Right.
And so, you know, we just, and that doesn't mean you just send business to anyone just based upon their color. They have to be qualified. But when you find qualified people, we need to give people an opportunity.
I want to piggyback on that. I agree with everything that you said. And, you know, there are large numbers of people at large law firms. And so many of them are majority attorneys. You don't necessarily hear about the ones that don't really make it because there are so many numbers. But you often hear about the faux pas that the black lawyer makes on their way to ascending to partnership. And so, you know, the focus on the negative on the attorney of color and the fact that they're called out, or there may be a reference to them being stupid, or there may be a reference, dialogue that has no place in professional organizations, let alone large law firms, because there should be a baseline respect and treatment throughout the course of their matriculation in the law firm that should isolate and provide guardrails around such characterizations.
Mm-hmm. You know, Tracy, in your discussion, you talked about needing to have a thick skin and some of the really horrendous examples that those studies drew out. And I suspect, you know, the three of us, we've had a lifetime of figuring out how to confront and overcome bias. So can you take a moment and talk to our allies? Talk to the allies in your organizations and your firms about what they need to do when they see offensive comments being made, when they see an unfair standard being applied, when they see application of the black tax. What do they need to do to step up and take some of the burden off of the shoulders of the diverse lawyers and the diverse colleagues who they're trying to support?
Well, just briefly, I will note that it's very important for allyship to be highlighted in every law firm. I'll just speak from the law firm perspective. And it is. In fact, at our firm, we have a very strong and robust allyship group that's headed, again, by our Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer and her team. People of color don't need to solve the problem. We're already subject to the issue. And so my message to our allies is to always speak up, to, in fact, be the first to speak, because oftentimes the treatment and statements and discriminatory behavior starts in rooms where the person of color may not even be present. And so, but for them speaking up and but for them escalating those issues, they will continue because we won't even know about them in many cases. On top of that, it's very important for our senior leaders in our law firms, our management, our executive teams, boards of directors, to have these conversations at that level so that it's not just a one-off, but that it's a discussion at a broader level. And therefore, everyone will know that the tone comes from the top.
And I think a lot of it starts with training, too. I mean, one of the things we just had in the last couple months, even in the middle of the pandemic, we had sexual harassment diversity training, but we just had some implicit bias training. And there were a number of people who had never even heard the term of microaggressions. And I tell them all, this is not an indictment on anyone, but me as a leader of this organization, I have a fiduciary responsibility to educate as many people as we can in our organization so people can understand. Because what I found out, once people are exposed to it, a lot of the things that occur, as Tracy gave the examples that were, mind-numbing, but, we've been dealing with it our whole life, is the fact that once people see that, they will recognize that, wow, that does go on. And it is different. And it's okay to be different. And sometimes, I know, speaking from me, I don't need you to help me solve it. I just need you to help me understand and to be able to look at things. And I've said it to some of the people that we've hired at the Big Ten. I have two chief of staffs, who are Jess Palermo and Adam Newman, and May Davis, who's been with me for 30 years. There's been people who are close with me, and I told them, when you work with me and a black man in a position like this, you will never see the world the same ever again. Because you will look at media, you'll now start to understand all of these little subtle things that are going on, that have been going on, but that really do impact this. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why it's important of conferences like this are so special, for us to be able to talk about these issues, mm-hmm. to understand, the rules of, engagement. And if you've never, been invited to play golf, before, and I just take you to a country club, and then all of a sudden, and if you don't show up with the proper shoes or pants or club, and then I judge you and say that that person is not talented, and that's what's happened. My dad used to tell a great story about the lazy Susan, where, if you have a lazy Susan in the middle of the table, and if you get, 10 people with incredible IQs and ask them, what is that called? If they've never seen one, there's no possible way that they could come up and say, the thing in the middle of the table that you put the condiments on that spins around is a lazy Susan. They just wouldn't.
Right.
But so many times in life, we're judged because we didn't know that was a lazy Susan. And our promotion and progress and all the things, our credibility, is because no one ever pulled us aside, because once we hear it one time. But one of the things that I do say for individuals who've been in perceived marginalized communities is, instead of looking at it as a negative, the things that we've had to endure has given us the strength and the power. And so I am grateful that 70 days into being commissioner, that a global pandemic hit. I'm grateful, I really am, because there's certain strength, whether it's my prayer life or belief in God, or even the work ethic to take it to a higher level, is that I was able to get better, this year. And so instead of us making excuses on a lot of things that we've gone through, I would say to all the people who have feel that they have been held back, that's made you even stronger, and to use that to your benefit.
I think that I just want to piggyback. Those words were so beautiful, because, we are in a pandemic, and what are we going to do with it? And I've told some of I happen to be on the Attorneys of Color ERG, our employee resource group, and so when the murder of George Floyd happened, many of our African American and attorneys of color locally were very distressed, of course. Some of them lived just down the street from the murder, and they could smell smoke, or there was a lot going on. And so we had to pause and talk with them. But there's also a positive at the end of all of this. We're able to be with ourselves. I know, again, a lot of times, but take that time, self-reflection, your faith, and look at what we can do collectively. We can also reach across a lot of lines and touch people that we couldn't because we're not having to travel. As you said in your remarks, flip on your Zoom. And how many meetings have you had in 5 days? you know, so many that you would not have been able to get on the plane for. So there are positives, and we have to look for those lights at the end of the tunnel, even at this time.
And Lola, you asked about what allies can do. One of the most powerful pictures I've ever seen is John Lewis when he was crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge. But the one where he's bleeding from the head, you notice there's a Jewish gentleman there who was there with him, who was literally picking out teeth that had been knocked out of his mouth. So when you talk about being an ally, you know, he didn't have to tell John Lewis, oh, I know what it means to be black. What he says is, I understand the struggle. And that's why I'm here to walk across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. That's why I'm getting my teeth knocked out. And I'm here with you, not only in my words. He didn't write him a letter. He didn't send him a telegraph. You know, he didn't send him a text or an email. He was there with them. And so from an ally standpoint, people need to take that, look at that picture on the internet. And that's when I see that, I said, that's really the essence of an ally.
And you know what else? He didn't wait until after the meeting
No.
to express his support. He was in the moment,
Yep.
right? And that's so important for so many reasons.
Yes.
Both of you are really hitting at this urgency of now. And certainly there's a large part of it that arises from what happened with George Floyd this summer. Part of it, I'm sure, is also part of the effects of this pandemic on communities of color and healthcare outcomes and education and unemployment. So there's this impatience for change. So what do we do now? All the questions I'm getting are asking for specific advice for what do we do now to make sure that we don't miss this moment?
I tell you, from my standpoint, the way I've looked at it, and I was always a person who understood the moment being the moment and the sense of urgency. What I tell people, what you do now is that if you knew the world was going to end in a week, you know, if you knew next Friday that was it, you know, what would you do? And I think that's the important from making a change standpoint is all the talking about it and the rhetoric and all these things, that's wonderful. But now we have to move to action to understand, to really help. And I would say, you know, we're eventually, one day, we're going to come, it'll be a new normal. We're going to come out of this pandemic. But I would challenge people to look back to say, you know, what did you do? You know, what did you really, what would be in a court of law? You know, what are the exhibits that you're going to enter into evidence that you say that we went through all these social justice issues from Armand Arbery to, you know, Breonna Taylor, you can go Philando Castile, we can go on and on, all the way back to Emmett Till, and now to George Floyd, things are still happening, but what did you do? And that's one of the reasons why when you see Judge Page and what Diane and what they've created, they did something. They've left a legacy. They've changed people's lives. And so if we take this time in our life to really do something about it, whatever that is, and it could be just for one person, because sometimes it only takes one person to change the world, just that one person, just during this pandemic, do something. Whatever that do something is. And I think that's what I'm trying to challenge people to do. Just this is a time that we need poetry in motion to occur.
You know, when you mention a time such as this, I'm reminded of when I lived in Los Angeles. And I was there during Rodney King's murder. And I actually practiced civil rights law at that time. And there were people that were very active then that continue to be active to this day. Some are in Congress now. Some are professional people. Some are athletes or entertainers. There was a collective of people that were doing that work then to try to make a better today. But we still had George Floyd in 2020. So I completely agree with Kevin. Your now is your now. Who would have thought that when Rodney King was beaten, that we'd have George Floyd murdered in 2020, and all that were in between, from the Michael Browns to the litany to the Eric Gardners, to everyone that the Sandra Blands. So I encourage us to look positively and not demonize those that are marching. Because if we had every ally or person that was not of color that thought that perhaps they could not be beaten up or killed in the street, to think about it could be their child. It could be their child. It could be their mixed race son. It could be their colleague who they really like down the hall. That's the one black guy that they really like. He could be killed. So if you can put yourself in the position of those that have been harmed, maimed, killed, that may be another way for us, all of us, to think about this moment as a ready moment.
And not only from a physical standpoint, I talk a lot about, corporate assassinations too. What I like to focus on is not only goes on, because when we see what happened to George Floyd, it becomes obvious. And to see what happened, physically, that this man was murdered. But the things that are just, you can't see, it's like the wind, are all the things that go on in law firms. All the, as I call them, where really meetings do occur, is the meetings before the meeting and the meetings after the meeting. All those different things that have happened, that we as a people and with our allies, regardless of who we are, regardless is for an LGBTQ issue, we're a gender issue of color, black or white, and that goes for people of color doing it to people of non-color in organizations. We just need to come together to recognize we're the same and to make sure these character assassinations and these meetings before the meeting and meetings after the meeting and things people not saying, things in the meeting, that we need to really stop that.
Right.
And to be able to make sure that we do that. So I make it very clear with us, when we open the floor, which I always do in all of our meetings, you got to speak up. Because if it's not said here, then I don't want to hear about it later that we decided this or here's the thought. It wasn't said in the meeting. Because that's one of the things we have to really, break the walls down regardless of who we are and start making sure that the playing field is level for everyone.
So I can tell that the folks watching are thinking about carrots and sticks as they think about how they themselves can be catalysts for change. So I'm going to read a couple of questions that both get to this. So the first question is, should Big Ten tie compensation of coaches, chancellors, or other highly paid staff to meeting diversity targets? And similarly, then the next question, from a different viewer, what are your thoughts on having top-level partner compensation tied to meeting diversity requirements?
Yeah, here's where I am, is that one of the things we have to start doing, and I think people recognize this, what Tracy said, is that we got to stop being scared, and that's one of the things, and whether the fear comes from within, is we need to start standing up and doing what's right. And so there are a lot of things that, now, I don't want to say that the pandemic is over or coming to an end, that as we put on the slide, that I'm really going to start to focus on, because I want us to be thought leaders. I can't tell you the number of people, even at the Vikings, when we talked about having an LGBTQ symposium at our facility, that there were a number of people within our organization that externally told us, you better have that as a hotel. You better not have that at the Vikings headquarters because of the impact. You know what? I don't care. And so, where we are in the Big Ten, there's certain things that we're going to do from a diversity and inclusion standpoint to give women, to people of color, marginalized communities, LGBTQ members, opportunities. Because I'm focused on making sure, because at the end of the day, it's better for our organization. And that's where we are. And I tell people all the time, even if you don't believe in it and the only thing you're focused on is making money, it still makes sense.
Right.
And that's what we have to get to the point. So you will see things. So whether it was a voter registration, whether it was to address mental health and wellness, or the Equality Coalition, there are things that we're going to do. We've done all this even during a pandemic. We've been able to do this. So I'm looking forward to things that Tracy's going to do, things that are going on in the legal field, things that we're going to do, and to be able to continually do the right thing and take a stance on it, because this is the time. We now have an opportunity where people have made it comfortable to deal with these social justice issues.
Yeah, and I just want to piggyback on that, Kevin, because at law firms, particularly our firm to speak, we have 9 ERGs. We're talking about making people feel comfortable, right? So we've got, ERGs for women attorneys, women associates, LGBTQ population attorneys, veterans, attorneys of color. That means that we also have a wellness program that was just instituted this year, which is becoming a part of, actually signing on to the ABA wellness mandate if you choose. And so again, this is back to Kevin's point. We want our work environment to feel comfortable. We're all doing various different things, and we make up, we're a beautiful melting pot of attorneys at our firms. And so let's address all of us. Let's not any longer just address the largest population of us. And so it's truly making our workplace more integrated. That's my
So
tip.
let's talk a little bit about imposter syndrome. You know, this idea that so many people of color feel like they walk around their workplaces as a phony. Like at any moment, people are going to discover that they're unqualified to sit there. Knowing that we're in a moment where we need to be unafraid to advocate for ourselves and to advocate for others, what advice do you have for people who carry that imposter syndrome within them?
No, from my advice is that, you know, they can do it. And one of the things I recognize, I think this next decade may not be pleasant, what I'm going to say, is really a time of it's going to be a time of hard work, of discipline. And so I would challenge people, you know, the road to whatever you call success or the road to wherever you think that you're going to get to is not paved with milk and honey. It's not. And there are going to be many sleepless nights. There are going to be many times that you're going to need to go leave the office and go home and take care of things and come back. You know, there are going to be many things. And I think what people have to recognize, that's why I don't even talk about it anymore, you know, we're going to have to do more. And I think I've already reached the point and rationalized to myself, no matter what, no matter where I am in my career, regardless of the position, these next 10 years are going to be like climbing a flat mountain. And we can't say that it's flat. We got to figure out how to do it. And so I just think this generation where we are right now, especially these young people, are so talented. You know, we need to dial down the social media. You know, we need to dial that back. And we need to go back to the work ethic, almost like what we would say, you know, WWPD. What would our parents do? We need to get back to the basics and go to work and learn and study. So if you feel someone has an imposter syndrome, the best way to be to get out of being an imposter is to become real. And the way you get real is to go do the work. And so it may require you to have to go back and get some old law school books out and go back and understand Penori versus Neff and understand the elements of that cases. It may require you to call Judge Page. And I'll tell you this, I mean, Judge Page, he was one of the first people that I called when we were going through this transition this year with the Big Ten, because he's a walking, very seldom do you get walking encyclopedias. Most of the time they're on the internet. And so I think what we have to start doing is using the resources that we have, stop being scared of things, put in the extra time. And if you feel like you're an imposter, you're not. But if you do feel that way, once you put in the extra time and you're prepared, you can actually grow out of that.
Those are beautiful words, and I completely agree. And I want to also piggyback again and say, I want us to take this time to know that the resources that we have are more than we ever had, because again, we're all in our homes, and there are so many CLEs, there are so many seminars, there are so many tutorials. There's so much that you can do. I mean, I find myself, again, I love to learn. I find myself logging on to X seminar to talk to this person about that and hone my skills on what's happening in the entertainment industry and what's happening in this, and how, if I'm doing that and I've got a full plate, I encourage everyone that's in this seminar to take advantage of all that you can do while you don't have to travel to get there. And there are many people that will help you if you do feel like you've got imposter syndrome, and it may be based on you walking into the doors of your firm because you're the only one, and so you have to sometimes code switch, and you've got to have someone that might discuss your hair or your skin. I mean, those things happen, but we're not, right now, we're all at home. And so in large law firms, you don't have to even look at anyone. You can just have your own sense of peace and solidarity and focus on what you need to do and build your confidence back up so that when you have to go back into the office, you're ready and you're full based on all that you've learned during this pandemic time. I think it's a good time to woodshed, as they used to call it.
Oh, yeah, two of the greatest business minds, right? And Bill Gates, I read an article last week, Bill Gates and Warren Buffett. It stuck with me. Bill Gates said he reads over 50 books a year. Warren Buffett spends between 4 and 6 hours a day reading trades, prospectus, magazines, just to learn. What I'm getting to, you think about Warren Buffett and Bill Gates, two of the wealthiest people, most successful people in the world. I mean, for them to take the time to do it. So I say all that to do is that, say it all the time, I am a very boring person because others spending time at home or getting my workout in. So with my wife Greta or my kids, it's work, you know. So this is not the time. I know the state that I'm in right now, this is hand-to-hand combat. And I've said, like I said, the next 10 years are going to be that way because we have a chance as a country right now to come together and to really continually grow for greatness and to work hard and to be able to get back just to the old simple grind that we have to do. And remember all the people, Judge Alan Page, Rosa Parks, Shirley Chisholm, you know, as Tracy talked about. There have been a lot of people who sacrificed to give us to get to this point. And I think we need to, one, remember that, two, recognize that, and two, take advantage of our talent and opportunity. Stop feeling bad or stop feeling like you're an imposter because you're not. There's so many talented people.
You know, you mentioned a moment ago a training that you all recently did on implicit bias. And I do think we're reaching a point where people at least understand that it's a thing. They understand the concept. But how do we move beyond? So what advice do you have for organizations that are looking at not just the reality of being aware of our bias, but what do we do about that bias? How do we get beyond bias?
Well, from my perspective, I'll look to what we do. And again, for organizations like large law firms, I think it's key that you have a designated chief diversity and inclusion officer. Many law firms have someone that's the head of their diversity, that's the same person that's a key partner. And it's like their dual roles do not allow for the diversity piece to be front and center at all times. I mean, many of them do a wonderful job. But if you have a dedicated person, then they can implement things such as Diversity Week, just for one. You know, where everyone in the firm is encouraged to do something regarding diversity, whether it's listening to a CLE that our diverse partners and associates participate in, whether you have to sit and have very uncomfortable and potentially uncomfortable conversations, whether you're also getting the implicit bias. I mean, it's almost like a think tank for 1 week. Again, that's 1 week, but then you carry that out throughout the course of the year. And so you have you know, breadcrumbs that are sprinkled along the way. So it's not just a 1 week, that's your kickoff and but it's a continuation throughout the course of the year. Specifically, I do believe that with regards to elimination of bias, just so that we can kind of kick that one kick that tire, until we have, again, the tone from the top that will eliminate bias and nip it at its root, it will be very difficult to eliminate. Because if you have a blind eye turned when and again, I believe that firms, and I'm sure corporations are doing a much better job at it, but you have to see those people leaving the firm because of their bad behavior. There are bad characters. Everyone is not well-meaning. And unfortunately, that tone has to come from the top.
And we got to speak up too. I mean, I tell my kids that, open your mouth. You know, so many times that, you know, people see something and whatever it is, there may be a company who really is trying to do the right thing from a diversity and inclusion and elimination of bias standpoint, and it really is the wrong thing. So when you see that, speak up. You know, whether you're a person of color or whether you're an ally. And so I think that's what we have to do is just to speak up. And because so every morning that I wake up, I always ask myself, what's the worst possible thing I can do? And short of death, nothing. I mean, really. I mean, I've been in a lot of, I say it all the time, I've been in a lot of meetings and I've never seen anyone make a mistake in a legal document and die. I haven't. I mean, and I've seen it. Now, this may have cost companies money and, you know, embarrassment, but no one's died over that. And so I think anything short of death is that we just need to start relaxing and feeling comfortable about being able to speak up, you know, not in a overly embarrassing way or apologetic way, but be able to speak up like a professional. And I think the biggest thing is that we need to look at people in our work environment like they were family members. And we need to look at our businesses. This is incumbent upon us now, that if we looked at our business and asked ourselves, if our mom and dad, were Stinson and Mag, had founded this firm, what would Tracy be doing differently today? And that's how I look at it. I look at the Big Ten Conference that I have a responsibility at every level: legal, IT, finances, just professionalism, our officiating, all of those, dealing with tough issues, standing tall, not screaming and yelling and acting like I'm a madman, because I look at that as that basically my parents, that's how I view it from a positivity standpoint. And so I want to do everything that I possibly can to represent our 14 institutions, our 6.3 million alumni, our 10,000 student athletes. They may not agree with me, they may not agree with the approach, but I want them to say that he was able to stand tall and do everything he possibly can to make this conference the best conference that we have in college athletics, which does not mean you're going to agree all the time. I think it almost says it differently. A lot of people think associates in law firm, if they disagree with partners, those are people that I love hiring. I love people in meetings who will tell me that I totally disagree with that. And what about this thought? And so I think that's important, that I would encourage the young people who are listening to it, is this, just as my mom would say, again, get a little more bone structure in your backbone, to be able to communicate. That doesn't mean yelling and fighting. I'm not talking about that. But from a preparedness standpoint, and then when you get an opportunity to perform, make sure that you're ready, ready to do it.
We have about 1 minute left. So very quickly, lightning round. And to end on a positive note, what gives you hope for change in the next 10 years? When we stay awake, we stay woke, what gives you hope?
I'll jump in so you can finish. I'd like you to be the last word, Kevin. Sponsorship gives me hope. Because if we can find someone, and if they can find you, and if you can grab them where they are and meet them and give them the blueprint to rise, as you so beautifully stated, the Page Foundation is doing, lift them up every step of the way. Call in, check in, have them call you. I didn't get this right. I'm not quite sure. Someone helped me. And so I'm encouraged by sponsorship, because we've got to do it very intentionally, one-on-one, and bring everyone up.
Right.
I think our young people really give me hope. I mean, we've, on our Equality Coalition, we have a lot of our student athletes, and to hear them articulate some of the work that they've done and the passion they have, they're incredibly bright. And I say it on all of our calls. I have a feeling that one of our student athletes right now, in 2020 in the Big Ten, will be the President of the United States. I believe that. And so that's what gives me hope, is our young people. And also, I think the struggle right now, if you look at the worst thing you can do to a butterfly is to cut the cocoon. And I think what we're going through right now, because the reason why they have to struggle is to get all the muck off their wings so they can fly. And I think that's what we're going through right now as a country. We're trying to figure out our way. We're struggling out of the cocoon, but it's going to be okay. And so I just think we need to stay steady, stay positive, encourage, invest in organizations like the Page Education Foundation, encourage our young people. Make sure every day that you say something positive to the people in your house first, but externally, just be a positive person and be a change agent, and then give them an opportunity. And so just because you don't have an internship program, start one. This summer we had to have an internship program, and so many people have said, well, we can't do it because COVID. I said, why can't we do it? And so we were still able to hire an internship program, give people a chance, and had them do a capstone project, on Zoom, and it worked out well. And they will always carry the Big Ten torch. So it's been an honor to be here with you all today.
It's been fantastic. I can't thank you both enough for your presentations and for our conversation today. You both keep your foot on the gas and the pressure on our shoulders and the wind in our sails. So thank you for that. It's been wonderful.
Thank you, Lola. Thank you so much for all that you do.
All right. Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
We want to thank you for joining us today. We really hope you enjoyed the program and want to thank our presenters, Tracy Bransford and Kevin Warren, our moderator, Lola Velasquez Aluga, for taking time to share their talents and knowledge. We also thank you to our presenting sponsors, the Minnesota Vikings, our speaker sponsor, United Health Group, and sustaining sponsors, Greenberg Torque, for their commitment and continued support, especially through this unprecedented year. You may now download your attendance certificate by clicking on the purple button directly underneath our program's live feed screen for our event site. And also, we are about halfway into our fundraising efforts for this event. So if you enjoyed the program, please make a donation so that way we may continue this vital work. Thank you again for joining us today, and have a good day.